Carrie. Carrie, collective impact recognizes that complex social and environmental issues, like the opioid epidemic, cannot be solved by one sector alone. What exactly is collective impact?
So collective impact was first introduced in 2011 in a journal article by Connie and Kramer. It includes 5 key components: a common agenda to make sure everyone's on the same page and moving towards the same goals, shared progress measures so everyone knows how progress and success will be assessed, mutually reinforcing activities to make sure that our activities are complementing one another and there are no gaps or duplications in communities, continuous communication to ensure the sharing of information in an organized and consistent manner, and finally a backbone organization to act as the facilitator and the system integrator and to keep everyone on the path moving forward. And when you combine all 5 of these components, you create a structure or the scaffolding to approach the work, plan for the work, and finally move the work forward.
Thank you. Next, for Tessa, I wanted to ask, one key component of collective impact is having a backbone to facilitate the work and act as a system integrator. Who is serving as the backbone organizations for Cohort 1 and Cohort 2, and why is it necessary for a backbone to support this work?
The backbone support of our Cohort 1 and Cohort 2 communities represent the unique needs and environment of each community. This may be the health department in some of our communities, it could be coalitions, other community organizations, or our mental health and recovery services boards. The backbone support is vital to continuing this work. If we are to do the hard and important work of working across sectors to solve complex issues on a large scale, we need a centralized support to keep our work going and make sure our initiatives are not becoming fragmented and disjointed. The backbone support does just this. The backbone support, like our own backbone, provides both flexibility and rigidity. While your own backbone serves as a pillar to support your body weight, the backbone support of collective impact is a flexible pillar that convenes collaborative partners to advance the common agenda while ensuring everyone impacted by the issue is both supported and present. By supporting this work across sectors, the backbone supports our work moving beyond a single program or service and supports us to intentionally shift a system. The ability to look across systems is essential for the backbone support, and what is unique to the backbone support of collective impact is that the emphasis on collaboration spans across community sectors. So rather than having representation of unique individuals involved from one sector, like education, for example, we're ensuring that everyone across sectors are representative. Collective impact says we want everyone impacted to be at the table, generating innovative solutions with us, and the backbone support facilitates this process.
Thank you. I next wanted to ask Matt to speak to this. How did the leadership team work with communities to come up with a common agenda?
Our first step when this project began was to understand the scope of what was going to be needed for us to impact the opioid epidemic across Ohio and in our CCIM4C communities. We drew on a conceptual map created by researchers in California, and that helped us understand that really to have a lasting impact on the epidemic, we were going to need to address prevention, treatment, recovery, and a social determinant of health. This was an initial step that helped us really begin to develop that common agenda. Our second step was to create our theory of change for the CCIM4C initiative as a whole. We specified what we hoped to do, who would do it, how we would do it, the frameworks we would use, and the outcomes that we hoped to achieve. Our theory of change really helped operationalize our common agenda for the project as a whole. And it really set the stage for everything that was going to come next. One of the most unique aspects of this initiative is that then our Cohort 1 communities, created a theory of change for their work as well. And what this really resulted in is a theory of change that had a common agenda for the project as a whole and a common agenda in each of our cohort 1 communities.
Thank you, Matt. Next, I wanted to ask Dana to speak to this. Continuous communication is a tenet of collective impact, but what is implied under a collective impact approach is a functioning ecosystem. How does an ecosystem strengthen the work of collective impact, and how can Thrive be used to develop an ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you, David. So to answer your first question, I think the ecosystem, the value of the ecosystem is really in helping communities, helping initiatives really think intentionally about how they're aligning for action. And also to think about how are you going to take these disparate parts and move them in one integrated direction and in turn and move them forward as one integrated initiative. In terms of collective impact and how the ecosystem supports that, I think we know that continuous communication is a really important tenet of collective impact, and the ecosystem really requires that we think about how are we going to be communicating across all the different parts of the ecosystem. How are we going to create a healthy ecosystem through continuous communication? That's really important in terms of building trust and building relationships with your partners. And really it's all about thinking about how are you going to structure for success? How are you going to ensure that all the parts are working together and that all your partners have an opportunity to contribute and to feel inspired by the work they're doing. I think Thrive is a really important piece of this and really offers an opportunity for partners to think about how the social determinants are impacting their work. It offers an opportunity for them to really think about it at a deeper level of prevention and to think about new ways of partnering and really engaging new and old partners.
Okay, thank you, Dana. My next question is for Tracy, and I want you to speak to this, Tracy. Common progress measures and mutually reinforcing activities are also important components of collective impact. How are communities using the strategic planning framework to ensure common progress measures and mutually reinforcing activities across the continuum of care?
Thank you, David. One of the key pieces about the strategic planning framework is that it is the essence of true validity and process. The strategic planning framework provides the communities to really look across all key continuums, from prevention, promotion, through treatment, intervention, and recovery. And the communities have been utilizing this in order, within their strategic plan maps, to have a structure in place that will enable them to really move forward collectively with values, activities, and goals in place that they can all work together and yet hold each other accountable. We find that when you hold each other accountable, the plan really becomes a true plan for true outcomes that will result from utilizing the strategic plan framework. We also know that the strategic plan framework and the plans that the community have developed really provides an opportunity for validity and for opportunity for measurement and engagement of others that are not involved in the community and can really begin to see that those strategic plans give them somewhat of strength and effort. The CCIM4C communities have really worked hard on their plans in order to really move forward and really move this plan, their activities in a place that will utilize themselves for the next few years.
Thank you, Tracy. Next, I wanted to ask Holly to speak to this. As a community of practice, we learned that opiate use and abuse is a wicked problem. What are the characteristics of a wicked problem? How is framing the opioid epidemic as a wicked problem helpful as communities work to address this issue?
The term wicked problems was coined by Horace Rittel and Melvin Weber in 1973. We call social problems such as the opioid epidemic wicked because they are vicious, like a circle, tricky, like a leprechaun, or aggressive, like a lion. These problems are wicked because they are never solved. They're only resolved. over and over again. This solving and resolving process requires communities to work together strategically, across and within systems in order to generate the most culturally relevant and sustainable approach to address the wicked problem at hand. Rattel and Weber offer 10 properties of wicked problems. The first property is that there is no definitive formulation of wicked problems. What that means is that the first step in addressing a wicked problem is actually framing the problem. In order to describe a wicked problem, you actually need to consider possible ideas for solving it. And by solving it, we don't mean specific detailed strategies. Instead, we mean creating an approach to work on the issue. For example, with the opioid epidemic, we knew the solution had to include prevention, supply reduction, demand reduction, and harm reduction. We knew it had to include treatment, and we knew it had to include recovery. But we knew all of those things, while they are necessary, were not sufficient. We also knew that we needed to address the community trauma and social determinants of health that were associated with the opioid epidemic. By framing a wicked problem, communities can then move forward with planning in a purposeful and intentional manner.
This is for Ruben. Through this process, we also learned that while prevention, treatment, and recovery are necessary to combat the opioid epidemic, they are not sufficient. Communities are facing multiple wicked problems and must also look at social determinants of health within their communities. How did looking at the social determinants of health enrich this project? How did considering community trauma fit into this project?
Thanks, David. So I think being able to think about social determinants of health really helped folks in this community to be able to go a little bit deeper and start asking the questions around what is actually driving the epidemic beyond what we usually think about as driving an epidemic. And be able to ask those questions not only of themselves, but also of folks within their communities. And then once we were able to ask those questions, it then allowed us to go a little bit more broadly, and using that lens of community trauma helped us to kind of consider a fuller picture of the community and look at those things that might be impacting the epidemic beyond what we usually think about. So it opened up opportunities to start thinking about economic opportunity and living wages, or housing, or social connection, which I know became such a huge issue for so many folks that are part of the CCIM4C project. And I think that's kind of put folks in a better place to be able to think about how we address this current epidemic, but also how we can address other crises as they arise, other crises that are emerging, and other challenges that folks might be facing as well.
Thank you, Ruben. I wanted to ask Raylette, CCIM4C communities have worked hard over the past 2 years to create a community-driven response to the opioid epidemic based on the tenets of collective impact. Why is it important for communities to plan for sustainability after the end of this project?
Thank you, David. I think the communities have done a fabulous job with the work they have been doing thus far over the past 2 years to create a community-driven opioid response. I think it is so important to plan for sustainability. I love the fact what the communities have done. They have brought together key partners, key stakeholders to really begin to put together a plan and to address the response. It is so important to begin now to look at planning for sustainability, because as we think about all the great work that you have done thus far, how do we begin to look at sustaining the outcomes of the great work that you have done thus far? I think that is so important. And so the communities, the CCIM4C communities, they have begun to plan now, bringing all the partners together to see now how can we sustain certain outcomes such as education to really keep our communities thriving and moving forward with this process.